I have to start this one with a serious warning because honestly, the case we're talking about today is one of the sickest, most deeply unsettling cases I've ever had to research. I mean it. We are talking about a man considered Japan's worst ever serial killer, and he's earned the nickname the Otaku Murderer. The details are horrific, mainly because they involve the worst kind of victim, little children. So just a heavy trigger warning right now. This case deals with child abduction, abuse, and murder. It's hard to talk about and it will absolutely leave a mark on you. Please only continue watching if you feel like you can handle it. Seriously, if you need to skip this one, I completely get it. Now, why is this guy so shocking? Well, I'm not going to get into all the main details yet because trust me, you need to hear this story chronologically to really grasp the terror. But here's the thing that will stick with you. After he was finally caught, police found his apartment was basically a house of horrors. They found about 6,000 videotapes, a huge mix of anime, horror films, and tapes he had made himself of his own victims. But the sickest part, they found something else too. Something physical that he kept as a sick memento in his closet. I'm telling you, this case is truly disturbing, and the ripple effect it had on Japan's society was massive. If that hasn't made you want to stay to hear the full story, I don't know what will. This is the case of Tsutomu Miyazaki. Hey everyone, and welcome back. And to anyone new watching, hello. My name is Zara, and on this channel we dive deep into true crime cases. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please join the fam, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it around if you can. Taking 2 seconds to do that really helps the channel out, and it means, honestly, so much to me. Also, if you want to get to know each other a little bit more, consider becoming a member. You get instant access to our private Discord server, and we can chat one-on-one about anything and everything and become friends. You can just hit that join button below this video to get in. Let's go to Tokyo, Japan, specifically the area of Itsukaichi, which is out on the western edge of the city. We're going to the year 1962, the year Tsutomu Miyazaki was born on August 21st. Now, what was the area like back then? Japan in the early 1960s was right in the middle of its post-war economic boom. It was a time of intense national rebuilding, modernization, and it had a general sense of just moving forward. For the locals, especially in a more suburban, well-off area like Itsukaichi, life was generally considered incredibly safe and orderly, a place where kids could walk around freely without a second thought. There was a huge emphasis on tradition, community, and social harmony, which makes what happened later even more shocking. Tsutomu came from a family that was pretty prominent in the area. His family ran a regional newspaper company, and his grandfather and great-grandfather had even served on the town council. They were well known and they were wealthy. However, from the start, Tsutomu's life was difficult because he was born prematurely and he also had a rare congenital disability called radio-ulnar synostosis. This condition meant the bones in his forearm, the radius, and the ulna were fused together. So for Tsutomu, this made it impossible for him to turn his wrists, upward. And imagine not being able to fully rotate your wrist. It was a significant physical difference that was hard to hide. If you wanted to face his palm up, he would have to rotate his entire arm, I believe. Due to his parents being super busy with the family business, Tsutomu was mainly raised by his grandfather, which he was very close to, and a hired live-in male nanny who had an intellectual disability. This bond with his grandfather was essentially the only positive, stable relationship he really had. Unfortunately, his physical disability became a big issue when he started school. As you can imagine, kids can be cruel, and he was relentlessly rejected and bullied because of his wrists. He became incredibly reclusive and isolated, which led to a really poor social life. He basically retreated into himself and began to develop an obsession over manga, which are Japanese comics or graphic novels. Here's the really frustrating part though. Tsutomu was actually an incredibly smart kid. He was a star student at Meidai Nakano High School, a super prestigious school, and was even ranked at the top of his class for a while. He had dreams of becoming an English teacher, but as his social isolation got worse, his reclusive tendencies really took over and his grades then began to drop dramatically. Instead of getting the admission to the again prestigious major university that top students from his high school usually just automatically got, he had to settle for a local junior college where he decided to study photography and become a photo technician. This was a major blow to his original career goal, and in hindsight, probably a really serious turning point. After junior college, Tsutomu moved back into his parents' house in Izukaichi, sharing a room with his older sister. His parents even gifted him a car kind of to like cheer him up. And even though his family was pretty well off and influential, he had zero interest in taking over the family newspaper business. He was just drifting into his own world. It was while studying photography that things really started to take a dark turn for him. He began taking inappropriate photos of women. Now, like I said, he had already been socially isolated since high school. So being in university, he was no better, and he was also unable to socialize with women. So he began to take pictures of women playing tennis. He would zoom in on their crotches and then would use these photos he took for his own pleasure, if you catch my drift. But these photos soon sent him into this spiral into a deep consuming addiction of pornography and horror films. And I think that's one of the things a lot of socially isolated men struggle with, because obviously they have this, higher sex drive and a need for sexual contact with a woman or a man, whatever it may be. And the problem is when you're so socially isolated, you can't actually go and seek that, because you can't even talk to a woman because you don't know how to communicate, because he didn't seem to have any friends, and he definitely didn't seem to have any girlfriends. So it was like this weird consuming addiction, because he was so addicted to women from what he could see in porn, but yet he never had contact with anyone. And you have to understand what pornography was like in Japan at the time. So it was heavily censored, often featuring blurred out private parts. So normal pornography is just like you see everything, but in Japan, they would like just blur out the actual act. And for a lot of people, this was just the norm, and that's just how they consumed porn. But for sick individuals, it became a trigger for something else. Like any addict, once Tsutomu got his fill of the censored available content, it quickly became boring, and he needed a stronger, sicker hit to satisfy his compulsion. This is where the truly dark stuff starts, because his craving for a new, bigger thrill led him down the vile path of seeking out CP in 1984 at just 22 years old. This descent into needing sicker and sicker content is actually really a common terrifying pattern we see with people who harbor these kinds of dangerous fantasies. We also see this with really rich people. They can get whatever they want. They can have whatever woman, man they want. So the norm becomes boring, and then they need new, more exciting, taboo stuff. This is where Tsutomu began collecting pornographic anime, adult magazines, violent films, and CP. During this part of his life, his relationship with his family completely deteriorated. His parents, seeing him retreat further into his room with his tapes, actually tried to talk to him to help him, but Tsutomu felt they were too worried about material things and not enough about his actual problems. He later said that all he really wanted was for someone to listen to him, but he believed his parents would have just brushed him off. His mental health was deteriorating so badly that he even started to contemplate suicide. The only two people he felt any real connection to were his older sister and his grandfather. Then in May 1998, the one person who gave him the most support, his grandfather, passed away. This loss was extremely devastating. It plunged Tsutomu into a severe depression, and his isolation and internal aggression just boiled over into actual violence. In a truly disturbing act, in a weird attempt to retain something from the only person who had ever truly understood him, Tsutomu committed a really shocking act, I guess, of cannibalism. He reportedly ate part of his grandfather's ashes. I told you this was sick, right? The violence and anger he felt didn't stay inside for long. Just a few weeks after his grandfather's death, his older sister caught him watching her while she was taking a shower. When she confronted him about it, he didn't just back down, like you would expect him to. He was doing the wrong thing. He instead attacked her. When their mother found out about the incident and tried to intervene, urging him to get his life together and spend less time with his videotapes, Tsutomu attacked her too. This was a clear sign that he was now a ticking time bomb. Just a couple of months later, Tsutomu would claim his first innocent victim. On August 22nd, 1988, the day after his 26th birthday, Tsutomu went out seeking to now fulfill the horrific fantasies he had been cultivating through his videotapes. This was the start of a 10-month reign of terror that would paralyze the Tokyo and Saitama regions. So now I'm going to talk about the 4 victims, and the details are very graphic and it will be upsetting. On August 22nd, 1988, Mari Kono, just 4 years old, vanished while she was playing at a friend's house. Tsutomu, driving his black Nissan Langley, was able to lure the little girl into his car. He then drove out of Tokyo to a wooded area, parking his car under a bridge. He sat there with her for half an hour before he murdered her. He strangled that little girl, and in a truly vile act, he SA'd her corpse, acts of necrophilia. He dumped her little body in the hills near his home, but he kept her clothes with him. He then let her body decompose for a while before returning to the gruesome scene to remove her hands, feet, and some of her teeth, which he took home and kept in his closet as sick trophies. But he wasn't done being horrific. He took the remaining bones, he burned them in his furnace, and ground them into a powder. On February 6, 1989, months later, he then packaged the ashes along with some of her teeth and photos of her clothes and sent them to her grieving family with a postcard that read in Japanese, "Mari, bones, cremated, investigate, prove." I mean, to taunt a victim's family, the family of a little 4-year-old girl, it makes me want to just cry, but he wasn't done yet. On February 11th, 1989, police received a 3-page letter claiming to be from a man named Yoko Imada that confessed to the murder of Mari Kono. The letter was mocking the police and Mari's parents, their hopes of ever finding her alive. On October 3rd, 1988, just 2 weeks later, Masami Yoshizawa, a 7-year-old girl, was walking along a rural road when Tsutomu spotted her. He again offered her a ride, which she tragically accepted. He drove her to the same secluded spot where he had killed Mari. There, he killed Masami and again engaged in SA with her corpse before taking her clothes as trophies and leaving her body behind under that bridge. 2 months later, on December 12th, 1988, he saw Erika Namba, another 4-year-old girl who was on her way home from a friend's house. Tsutomu didn't bother to offer her a ride or pretend to be a kind stranger. This time he just grabbed her off the street, forced her into his car, and drove to an empty parking lot. He forced her to strip in the back seat and began taking photographs. There was no pretending now, just orders of how to fulfill his sick fantasies. After murdering her, he tied her hands and feet behind her back, covered her with the bedsheet, and put her body in the trunk of his car. He eventually disposed of her clothes in a wooded area and left her body in an adjoining parking lot where it was discovered just 3 days later. But as if the discovery of their child's body wasn't enough for the Namba family, like his first victim, he sent a disturbing, taunting message to Erika's family. They received a postcard where the message was assembled from words cut out of magazines, and it said, "Erika, cold, cough, throat, rest, death." Police also learned that both Mari and Erika's families had been receiving strange phone calls and letters referring to the girls' murders. His final known victim was 5-year-old Ayako Namoto. On June 6, 1989, Ayako was outside playing when Tsutomu approached her and asked her if he could take her picture. He managed to convince Ayako to let him take pictures of her before luring her into his car and murdering her. He covered her corpse with a bedsheet and placed her in his trunk. This time, he didn't leave her body in the woods. This time, he took Ayako's corpse back to his apartment like he owned her. He then spent the next 2 days SAing her remains, filming and photographing her body in various positions while pleasuring himself. When her corpse began to decompose, the smell, was too much for him, I guess, so he dismembered it, leaving her torso in a toilet in a cemetery and her head in nearby hills, spreading her remains around like she was garbage. Then he decided to keep the rest of her remains with him. He didn't want the police finding Ayako's body, even though at this point police had already found her torso in the cemetery toilet. So Tsutomu went back to the places where he scattered her remains and collected them all and kept them with the rest of her remains inside his wardrobe right next to where he kept Mari Kono's hands. He also kept Ayako's hands, his trophies. And in an act of sickening cannibalism, he drank blood from her remains and ate part of her hand. He would often take the body parts out of his wardrobe and lay them next to him as he slept at night. He wanted to relive these experiences over and over again. This is the level of horror we're talking about, guys. He wanted ownership of his victims. I guess feeling so isolated and weak in his adult life caused him to seek power over the most helpless victims. One more part that is just really sick, and honestly, I wouldn't even talk about it, but I think it kind of plays a part. No pun intended, because apparently Tsutomu was very insecure. I mean, obviously, yes, with a physical deformity, but he was also incredibly insecure about his small penis. So it's claimed he saw his victims as just another character in his twisted manga obsession. Choosing little girls also meant that his penis looked bigger. I mean, are you guys okay? I am not okay. I always think I can handle these cases, and then They are just so, so hard. How can someone even think of doing this to a child, let alone multiple children? It's devastating. For 10 months, this horror was playing out and the police were completely baffled. These little girls went missing and some of their bodies were found and some were still missing. And this lack of connection between the victims, the bizarre notes, and the dismemberment made it an incredibly difficult case to solve. It just sparked massive public fear instead. In the summer of 1989, Tsutomu was becoming reckless. His sexual appetite was way too high. He saw a girl in the street and convinced her somehow to pull down her undies so he could photograph her. But as he was about to take the pictures, neighbors were alerted and they chased Tsutomu, but he managed to escape. But the nightmare finally came to an end on July 23rd, 1989. Not because of some amazing detective work, not because Tsutomu finally came clean, was remorseful, but because he was careless. 7 weeks after murdering his fifth victim, Ayako, Tsutomu was driving past a park in Hachioji when he spotted two young sisters playing. So he parked his car, he got out, and he offered to take pictures of the sisters playing. The older sister was pretty freaked out by this, so she actually ran off and I believe tried to look for her father, but Tsutomu managed to convince the younger sister to follow him and was able to separate her from her older sister. He then led this young girl into an isolated area of the park and convinced the young girl to strip nude so he could take photos of her. Now, again, apparently he also attempted to insert the zoom lens of his camera into the little girl. I don't get it. I don't get how sick these people can be, because what the actual what is wrong with him? I can't even imagine what this little girl was thinking. You know, 1 minute she's playing in the park and then the next, this freaking strange man is doing this absurd act to her in public, like this poor, poor girl. But thankfully, here is where he messed up. The girl's father had been watching. When the older sister told her father about this man, the father ran off looking for his younger daughter. The father then saw Tsutomu taking these inappropriate pictures and immediately confronted him. The father jumped onto Tsutomu and pushed him to the ground. In a panic, Tsutomu pushed the girl away and then tried to run to his car to escape. However, he couldn't make it to his car and he managed to escape another way instead. And the father, along with some bystanders who had heard the commotion, were in complete shock and called the police. Thankfully, the little girl was okay. Now, one thing I just found so odd, like how did he even manage to get this girl naked in a park? So I'm guessing she probably wasn't completely naked, but he probably convinced her to like take off her pants or underwear or something. And then another part, like another article I read was that Tsutomu was naked, possibly from the waist down. So he was like, the father jumped on him and Tsutomu was running away like half naked. But I was like, if Jay ever saw this happening, Tsutomu would not be alive today. You know what I mean? Like that father, if he got his hands on Tsutomu would not have, like, I can't believe he got away. Police arrived pretty quickly and searched the park for this strange freaking man, but were unable to find him. Again, he got away. However, just an hour later, Tsutomu did the dumbest thing. This douche lord came back to the park to try and get his car. He was completely unaware that the police were still at the park. The little girl's father, who was also still at the park, immediately spotted Tsutomu and pointed him out to the police. This time, there was no escaping. Officers arrested him on the spot, and what followed was a massive police investigation, and it all focused on Tsutomu's apartment. Once inside his home, investigators were shocked. I mean, my jaw dropped when I saw the photo of his apartment. I can't imagine actually being inside there and going through everything. There are walls and walls and walls and walls of videotapes, boxes upon boxes stacked to the ceiling. The true extent of his perversion was finally uncovered. This wasn't just a molester, this was a serial killer. So the key evidence included the video library. So that collection of nearly 6,000 videotapes, it was a mix of horror movies, slasher flicks, animated pornography, which is hentai, and his own homemade videos and pictures of his victims, including videos of the 2 days he spent with Ayako's body. Then the trophies in his closet. So in his closet or wardrobe, they found the gruesome physical trophies, guys. He had kept all these trophies, the hands and feet of Mari and the hands of Ayako. His black Nissan Langley was also covered in all sorts of forensic evidence linking him to the abductions. They also found the cameras he used, the notes cut from magazines, the letters sent to Ayako and Mari's parents, and other personal items of these murdered girls. This dumbass had documented everything. His photos and videos of his victims, it was all cataloged. The remains, the dead body parts of these little girls just casually kept in his closet. I mean, this just shows he had no real fear of being caught. He thought he was just going to keep cruising through his life doing this, getting away with this. During his interrogation, the police claim he confessed to the murders. However, later in court, Tsutomu would claim the confession was forced, that an officer had hit him and threatened him to admit to the killings. He also claimed that the police were convinced his motive was entirely sexual because of his video collection, which led them to frame the entire investigation in a way that fit their narrative. Who cares? You had dead body parts of children in your closet. But because of the law, these claims caused a really messy situation that would just cloud the trial. The arrest and the subsequent revelation of his crimes sent Japan, as you can imagine, into a full-blown panic. This was a country where the idea of a serial killer, especially of children, was incredibly rare. And the trust that parents had in their communities to keep their children safe was absolutely shattered. We've talked about this before. Kids in Japan have a huge level of independence, and it was no different at that time. This crime made all the parents who trusted their neighbor to just second guess everyone. The media latched onto his massive collection of anime and horror tapes and named him the otaku murderer. This had a huge, terrible societal impact, instantly creating a stigma around the otaku subculture, which broadly means people with obsessive interests in things like anime, manga, and video games. And it kind of painted them as dangerous, socially incompetent, potential future criminals. And this was really hard because it was claimed that a majority of the youth in Japan at the time, or even now, had similar manga collections in their rooms. This stereotyping was pretty unfair, but it stuck. But obviously a majority, of these youth don't have videos of the victims dismembered and rotting while pleasuring themselves, come on. The trial itself was a marathon lasting over 7 years because the central argument was simple but hard to determine, which was Tsutomu's mental state at the time of the killings. The trial began on 30th March 1990 and Tsutomu was calm and collected. The prosecution argued that Tsutomu was legally competent. They pointed to the meticulous way he planned the abductions, the fact that he sent taunting, calculating notes to the families, and his efforts to hide and preserve the bodies and evidence for his own sick use. They said he had an extreme character disorder, but it wasn't a mental disorder that took away his criminal responsibility. They argued his confessions were concrete and comprehensive. The defense claimed he had retreated into a fantasy world due to his neglected upbringing. They tried to prove that he wasn't mentally competent, claiming that he suffered from conditions like integrated dysfunction syndrome, schizophrenia, or even multiple personality disorder. So under Japanese law, a person of unsound mind is not subject to punishment, and a feeble-minded person can receive a reduced sentence, which is a joke because being mentally competent can be such a broad spectrum, so it's an easy way to get out of punishment for some criminals. Tsutomu, speaking very quietly in court, also claimed he committed the crimes as if in a permanent dream and said he had been driven by visions of rat people. However, he had his own name, the Rat Man. That's honestly an insult to actual rats, okay? Tsutomu clearly tried to dodge responsibility by claiming he was not really responsible for the murders because it was the Rat Man's fault, his alter ego. He played the part of someone mentally ill, acting like he did in fact have multiple personalities, and for a while it kind of worked a little. Some experts who evaluated him even hesitated, wondering if there was actually some truth to his claims. The issue was that 3 different court-appointed psychiatric exams came up with 3 different conclusions. So one said he was completely competent, the other said he was either feeble-minded or had a mental disorder, and the district and high courts ultimately went with the first report, concluding that while he had a personality disorder, he was aware of his actions and their consequences and was fully liable for the crimes. The court, thankfully, was not interested in his performances. Chief Justice Fujita said the atrocious murder of 4 girls to satisfy his sexual desires leaves no room for leniency. Despite the appeals he made, the courts consistently rejected the defense's arguments for a reduced sentence based on diminished capacity. Tsutomu Miyazaki was sentenced to death by the Tokyo District Court in April of 1997. The ruling was upheld by the Tokyo High Court in June of 2001 and finally by the Supreme Court in January of 2006. The system took its time, but the ultimate decision was clear. The reason for this is also because in Japan, the time between sentencing and executions is around 8 years, and sometimes it's even longer when the defendants make so many appeals. Tsutomu appealed multiple times, but he was rejected every single time. Tsutomu also never once expressed any remorse towards his victims or his victims' families. On 17 June 2008, nearly 2 decades after his final crime, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed by hanging. This case, honestly, is one of the most horrific examples of how one sick mind can completely tear apart the fabric of a perceived safe society. In Japan, especially back then, trust was a given. Little girls walking home alone was completely normal. It was a symbol of that safe, orderly society where everyone, just followed the rules. Tsutomu, a seemingly normal photo technician living a mundane life, coming from a wealthy family, exploited that basic trust just to fulfill his truly violent, sick fantasies. He didn't just take the lives of Mari, Masami, Erika, and Ayako. He violently and horrifically violated their innocence and stole their entire future. I don't think I've ever heard of this being done to so many children, and I honestly know that there are worse cases out there. I mean, child trafficking alone is a huge reality that many of us don't even want to acknowledge. How are there people in our world that can harm other people to this extent, let alone an innocent child? It just baffles my brain. It's not something I will ever be able to comprehend. What could have happened differently? That's the saddest question in this case. Could earlier intervention have stopped it when he attacked his sister and his mom? Maybe. If his parents had gotten him psychiatric help after his grandfather's death, or for his severe isolation and withdrawal, if it was recognized that it was going to be as dangerous as it was, yes. And I don't actually feel sorry for him. Yes, he had a deformity. Yes, he didn't have friends, but his parents tried to help him, apparently. He grew up comfortable and well off. And yes, he had mental issues, which are a product of his childhood, but many of us have shit childhoods and we don't do what he did. When you see a person who wants to be alone for a majority of their time, has no friends, doesn't talk to his own family, who has a collection of videos and porn and is only consumed with that, that's a red flag. No, that's like a big black flag. Stop what you're doing and help this person. Porn alone and porn addiction are huge red flags. I have realized as I've gotten older how bad porn truly is, not only for everyone, but especially for men. Like, look into it. Look into what it does to people and society. And that's a topic for another day. But mental health wasn't discussed back then the way it is now. And because his crimes were so unprecedented for Japan, no one could have possibly seen it coming. And just looking at him, you wouldn't expect a man like him who seemed so timid and socially isolated and no friends and no personality, whatever he was, to do that and be able to lure little girls. And I feel like, he wasn't comfortable, talking to women. So what's easy? Little girls. The immediate effect on society was panic and the unfair perception of the otaku community, which I think faded as years passed. But the long-term, more positive effect was that the Japanese public was forced to confront the fact that evil can just hide anywhere, even in a society considered one of the safest in the world. Child safety became a much bigger discussion. Parents became more vigilant and the country became a little bit more guarded, but hopefully a little bit more watchful. The one thing that we must remember from these cases, from this case especially, is the victims and their families. Their lives were so badly ruined. They had to endure years of graphic testimony and the sickening reality of the notes and the packages he sent, what he did to their baby girls, what his apartment was like what he did to the bodies of the children that you gave birth to. It's just so fucked up, guys. The courage of those families to survive this horror and turn their grief into advocacy for a safer world for other kids is truly remarkable, because I don't know if I could do that. Had Tsutomu not been caught by that quick-thinking father in the park, who knows how much worse it could have been, how many more girls he would have killed. Given his pattern of escalation, it's terrifying to imagine, what else would he have done? What was the next sick notch in his belt? Once he got over little girls, what was next, This is a case that shows the absolute depths of human depravity, and I'm so sorry that these 4 little girls were the ones who had to pay the ultimate price for this one man's sick, unchecked fantasies. And that is the horrifying story of Tsutomu Miyazaki. Cases like these are so hard to do, guys. I'm sure it's just as hard for you guys to listen to. But, my mother-in-law was asking me, why do you do these cases? Why don't you switch to something else? And I was like, these cases, every time I do a new case, I take a piece of it with me. And, that's probably not the best thing in a way. But I honestly think it changes my life in a way, because there are things that before I got into true crime, I mean, I've always kind of been watching Law and Order since I was a little kid, but I would have been a different person. I would have been much more unaware. I would have thought the world was a bit more la-di-da than it truly is. You know, last week, Australia dealt with the horrific Bondi tragedy. Again, what happened there has now, again, I've taken a piece of it with me. Now, at big events, I'm eyeing exits. I'm coming up with a strategy of how to escape, how to protect my kids, my family. And stories like this, you know, when you're with your kids at the park, you got to pay attention, you got to watch. You know, before I would have been that mom like on the phone, letting my kids play. Absolutely not. That's never happening. And, you know, you can see it as a negative, or you can see it as one more way to keep you safe and keep the people around you safe and the people you care about safe. Because I feel like sometimes when you relax too much, these predators take their shot. You know, these little girls, if they had known that men like this in the world existed, and it's sad, little kids should not have to know about these kinds of things. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in, and we have to be aware. So as hard as these cases are to talk about, I feel that if it just helps like a few of you guys be aware in this world and kind of like take something with you, whatever the case may be, whether it's these types of horrific cases or the domestic violence cases that I talk about, or even like the honor killings, awareness, I feel like is key. I hope I'm making sense. So we're in 2026 now, guys. I truly believe that this year is going to be a great year. I'm so excited. I'm so happy. And I'm setting that intention. Good and bad things happen to everyone, but 2026 is going to be amazing. I put that vibe and those blessings out on you guys, and I can't wait to ride this year along with you guys and see what it has in store for all of us. So happy New Year, guys. Thank you so much for sticking by me, and I will see you in the next video. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.